All right, if you're gearing up for your biology exams, you know that reproduction is a massive topic. So, in this quick revision guide, we're going to break down all the key stuff you need to know. We'll go from the simplest single cell splitting in two all the way up to the big advantages of sexual reproduction. Let's jump right in.
So let's kick things off with a really fundamental question. Think about it. Things like eating or breathing. Well, an organism has to do those to stay alive. But reproduction, not so much. An individual can live its whole life without it. So why does pretty much all life on Earth put so much energy into doing it?
So, here's our game plan. First, we'll tackle that why question. Then we'll get into the absolute core of it all, the DNA blueprint. After that, we'll run through all the different ways of reproducing asexually, clear up a common mix-up between fission and fragmentation, and finally look at why sexual reproduction is such a big deal.
And the answer to that big why is actually pretty simple but really profound. It's not about keeping one individual organism alive. It's about keeping the entire species going. It's the only way to make sure life continues on after a single generation is gone. And this is what it all leads to, right? The fact that offspring look a whole lot like their parents. It's why we can recognize a species. It's all because they're working off of the same biological blueprint, a set of instructions passed down from parent to child that keeps the basic body design consistent.
So what is this blueprint we keep talking about? Well, when you strip everything else away, reproduction, no matter what kind, boils down to one fundamental event: making a copy of the organism's master plan. And that plan is encoded in its DNA.
Yep, that blueprint is DNA. It is the master code for, well, everything. Tucked away in the nucleus of a cell, it holds all the instructions for making proteins. And those proteins are what build the organism. So you can see how any tiny change in the DNA could lead to a change in the proteins, and ultimately, a different body design.
So how do we get from one cell to two? It's basically a three-step process. First, the cell has to make a complete copy of its DNA. Second, it needs to build some extra internal machinery, all the parts it needs to function. And finally, those two DNA copies pull apart, and the cell itself splits right down the middle, creating two brand new cells.
Now, this is a really, really important point. No copying process is ever perfect. Think about a photocopier. Each new copy gets just a tiny bit fuzzier. It's the same with DNA. Tiny little errors, or what we call variations, can pop up. And this slight imperfection, this built-in tendency for change, is literally the raw material for all of evolution.
Okay, exam takers, you're going to want to pay attention here. These are classic questions. So why is DNA copying so important? Well, it's how the blueprint for life gets passed on. And why is variation a good thing for the species? Because if the environment changes, say it gets hotter or colder, those little variations might just give some individuals the edge they need to survive, ensuring the whole species doesn't get wiped out.
All right, now that we get the whole DNA copying thing, let's look at the first major strategy organisms use: asexual reproduction. This is the whole show when just a single parent creates a new generation all by itself.
The most straightforward method is fission. Honestly, you can just think of it as cell division, plain and simple, for single-celled organisms. Something like an amoeba or a bacterium just grows to a certain size and then splits in half, creating two new individuals. That's it.
Now, what about organisms that are a bit more complex? Say, simple multicellular ones like the algae Spirogyra. Well, they can use something called fragmentation. The organism can literally just break up into smaller pieces, and each one of those fragments has what it takes to grow into a complete new organism. Regeneration is seriously cool. Take an organism like a planaria flatworm. If you cut it into pieces, each piece can grow back whatever parts it's missing and become a whole new worm. But here's the catch you have to remember. For most complex animals, this is more of a survival trick, not their main way of reproducing.
So some organisms, like hydra, actually use those incredible regenerative cells for reproduction in a process called budding. It's exactly what it sounds like. A little outgrowth, or a bud, forms on the parent's body, grows into a tiny little version of the parent, and then just pops off to start its own life.
Now, plants are the absolute champions of this kind of thing. With vegetative propagation, a whole new plant can grow from just a piece of the parent, like a stem from a rose bush or one of the eyes of a potato. It's a huge deal in farming because it's so fast and you get plants that are basically identical clones.
And finally, we have spore formation.
Think of the fuzzy mold on old bread, rhizopus. It produces these teeny tiny reproductive cells called spores. The brilliant part is that they're wrapped in a super tough wall, so they can survive just about anything until they land somewhere nice and moist where they can finally start to grow.
Okay, let's pause for a second. Fission and fragmentation. These two get mixed up on exams all the time. So let's put them side by side and nail down exactly what makes them different.
The number one difference to remember is the type of organism. Fission happens in unicellular creatures. It's just one cell dividing into two. Fragmentation, on the other hand, is for simple multicellular organisms. It's the whole body that breaks into pieces, and then each piece grows. So just think, fission equals cell division. Fragmentation equals body breaking. All right, we've just looked at all these clever ways an organism can make copies of itself, all alone. It seems pretty efficient, right? So why in the world would life ever evolve the much more complicated process of sexual reproduction, which requires two parents?
Well, this is the absolute game changer. Unlike asexual reproduction, where you're just making a copy of one parent's DNA, sexual reproduction is all about mixing things up. It takes the genetic blueprints from two different individuals and combines them to create a totally unique new one. And here is the why that matters so much. Asexual reproduction is fast and easy, but you get almost no genetic variation. The offspring are clones. That's great if the environment never changes. But sexual reproduction creates tons of variation by mixing up traits. This gives the species a much better shot at having some individuals who can survive when the world gets unpredictable. It is the ultimate tool for long-term survival.
And that leaves us with one final thing to think about. We've just seen how incredibly powerful variation from sexual reproduction is for the survival of a species. So here's the million-dollar question. Why do so many organisms still stick with the simpler, asexual method? Keep that one in mind for your exams. Think about speed, energy, and what works best when conditions are perfect. Okay, good luck with the revision.